Hello everyone, and welcome back to another video. Today, I'm going to be ranking all of the partners in the Paper Mario series. Now, just to clarify, this tier list includes what many would perceive as companions, such as Olivia, Huey, Kersti, Tippi, and Tiptron, as well as the Origami King partners, which function slightly differently to the others. However, for the most part, this list is still going to rank the partners of the Paper Mario series. Now, I'm going to be judging these on four major categories: their design, personality, story relevance, as well as their gameplay functionality. With all that being said, I really hope you enjoy. Let's get to ranking. So, an even more pertinent question, perhaps, to who is number one? Who is the worst partner in the Paper Mario series? Now, there were many candidates for this list, and I debated between which one I should include. But ultimately, I'd have to say that the very worst one has to be Miss Mouse. Now, there are a few reasons for this, but I wanted to get one out of the way. There is no reason at any point in the game, unless you're going for 100%, to even get Miss Mouse, much less use her in battle. There are a few problems with this character. For one, her design is, despite being basic, is probably the best part about her. I think it looks alright, but everything beside that is just very bad. She has almost no relevance in the entire story. She has a plot that I think was repurposed much better in the Origami King, in which you see her from chapter to chapter, and she's always doing something, stealing a badge related to the chapter that you're in one of the locations you go to. Now, the reason I think that this was done better in the Origami King is because Luigi looking for the keys is actually relevant to the plot, as those are the keys you need to progress. And it's also funny. None of Ms. Mouse's scenes are funny, in any capacity. There's also the issue of Luigi's arc actually means something, because he keeps looking for all the keys, keeps finding the ones that Mario needs at the right time, but never the key to Peach's castle, the one he's actually looking for, and in the end, he had the key to Peach's castle in his car the entire time, and that's why it's funny. But Miss Mouse's arc never amounts to anything. She just looks for badge. We don't even know what badges she's really looking for. She's just around, and then she's not. And then that's it. Like, I really feel like they could have done more with this character. The quest that you even need to do to get her is also really boring and tedious, since you just walk all the way to Hooktail's castle, to the room where you battled Hooktail, go find an invisible block, blow the covering with Flurrie to get the badge, and then walk all the way back to Rogueport to get it. Now, this isn't too bad. It's not the worst example of backtracking in the original. The issue is, not only was this not shortened in any capacity in the remake, but it also serves no purpose, because once you complete it, you unlock Miss Mouse, who has one attack, Love Slap, and it's not even useful. It does so little damage, and because she's either the last or the penultimate partner that you unlock in this game, just before Bobbery, there's no point in ever using her. She is supposed to be a support character, but support characters just aren't useful in this game when it's mostly just about piling on damage as fast as possible and super guarding when you can. The point is that her moveset doesn't really feel like it was designed for Paper Mario the Thousand Year Door. There's also, of course, the issue of her moves costing way too much FP, like the one where she can heal 10 HP for 10 FP. Like, at that point, just use a Super Mushroom. It's not worth it at all. Now that our first of two placements in the terrible tier has been established, it is time for the only other one, who almost made it to the last place, but who I have to concede something for. And that, of course, is Tiptron, the Tippi clone that you can get from Francis at the end in the post-game. Now, the Tippi's, or should I say Lady Timpani's, best aspect was her story relevance and personality. Now, that was arguably, and like I would say definitively, the only good aspect of her as a character, since her one gameplay ability was just about using the Wiimote to point and reveal invisible stuff, like doors, for example, and switches, but that didn't really make the game more interesting so much as it just slowed it down. It added absolutely no... Super Paper Mario is always one of the games I hold up as an example of how motion controls can be needlessly included and not help anything. In fact, just make the game worse. Don't get me wrong. There are games that can use motion controls very, very well, but Super Paper Mario is not one of them at all. Now, Tiptron is just Tippi without the character, without the personality, which are the only two things going for her. The only reason she's higher... The only reason that Tiptron is higher than Miss Mouse is because, at the very least, Tiptron's ability can be useful for going for 100% in the post-game. If you haven't revealed everything invisible yet and you still need to look for more treasure, Tiptron can be useful if you haven't got anything in the main game. But whereas Miss Mouse, you don't need her treasure hunting ability at all. The sensor is incredibly inaccurate, and in the Thousand Year Door remake, there's now a detailed map that will tell you how many shine sprites and star pieces are in every single area, mostly making her ability obsolete. Now, that's pretty much it for the terrible tier. There's no other partners in the series that I think are quite that bad. Now, we start up with the Flawed. Characters who I think were okay in concept, but fall very, very flat in their execution. And I don't think a single partner in this entire series emphasizes falling flat because of bad execution any more than Lakilester does. Now, Lakilester is the last partner that you unlock in the original Paper Mario. And I feel like that's the cause of all of his other problems. He would actually be 2 or 3 tiers higher, maybe just 2, his attacks aren't that good, if he was unlocked just a few chapters earlier. But the problem is that he's the last partner you unlock in the middle of Chapter 6. By that point, you have no reason for his attacks. They cost too much FP, but not nearly as much FP as Bombette's attacks, who we're going to get to later. But the point is that they still cost way too much FP, and they're just not all that useful. Now, his overworld ability is pretty good, which is why he made it to Flawed tier, and he does have somewhat of a story presence, even though it's pretty basic. It's basically just a worse version of Vivian's story. He had a falling out with Huff and Puff, who was his boss, but it doesn't really amount to anything because he never had any attachment to Huff and Puff and just left as soon as he got beat by Mario. So it's not even a high-stakes moment or any sort of character building. That's one thing that Thousand Year Door definitively has over the original Paper Mario. There are some things that the original Paper Mario does better, don't get me wrong, but the main thing it has is characters that actually go through arcs. Every single partner in the entirety of the Thousand Year Door has some sort of arc, well, except for Miss Mouse, but again, she's barely even a partner since, she's not even really part of the story. You get her through an optional side quest. But either way, back to Lakilester. Like I said, his moves would be far more useful had they been unlocked earlier, and by the time you get him, there's no reason to ever use him. The only reason he's this high up is because he does have some story relevance, and his overworld ability where he carries Mario in a cloud is alright, if only that. Now, there are a few other characters in the Flawed tier that I'm going to get to now, and the next one is Kersti. Yeah, so Kersti's existence as a character kind of baffles me the more I think about it. Just the fact that the Paper Mario Team Intelligent Systems made a character, Goombella, who is one of the best partners in this entire series, so much so that she became the gold standard for many of the other characters and companions and partners in both her own franchise and the adjacent Mario and Luigi franchise developed by Alpha Dream. The issue, though, is that Goombella got so popular that the Alpha Dream devs decided to make a worse clone of her in Starlo, who had all of the aggressive spitefulness of Goombella, but none of the endearing charm. And then Intelligent Systems decided to make a worse clone of Starlo in Kersti. Now, aside from that, what is there to say about Kersti? Now, she does have some things going for her. The Paperized technique and the Battle Spinner are, admittedly not very fun abilities, but they are something that she brings to the table. You do need her to beat the game, and she is related to the plot, at least in some capacity, unlike everyone we talked about previously. Now, aside from that, she doesn't really have anything going for her. She's a bit of an annoying character who goes on long tirades for no reason about anything and everything, and is just not a likable character, as some of them we will see later. Overall, I don't really know what else to say. Just kind of a bad character with an annoying personality and a poorly explained backstory. She was a deity sent by the sort of fairy sent by the sticker comment to grant people's wishes. But, what does that entail? Why does she exist? Why can't the comet just do it itself? Why does it need, a fairy spirit to do it, to grant wishes for it? Okay, now moving on, in the Flawed tier, we have Bombette. Now, Bombette has a similar issue to Miss Mouse, but not nearly as severe, in that her attacks are way too expensive. She does not improve in any capacity, for example, Koops and Kooper do with their new abilities that they unlock later on, because Bombette's main attack that she gets at the end, where she can blow up every single enemy, whether they're on the ground or in the air, is so expensive that it's not even worth being used. You have better attacks by that point that can hit enemies in the air. It just serves no purpose. I put her higher than the other two because I think that if they just gave her an FP reduction, she could have been at least one, maybe 2 tiers higher. But as it stands, she's a pretty useless Bob-omb partner. And additionally, her story is basically non-existent. She was captured by the Kooper Bros, but why? For what purpose? It doesn't really make any sense. Now, aside from that, she does have some useful overworld abilities. She can blow up walls, tiny cracked segments of already weakened walls, which is alright. But again, just the fact that she has almost no connection to the story, is just randomly in the Koopa Bros Fort dungeon, and doesn't really add anything else to the game, means that I can't put her in the mediocre tier. Alright, who is next? I believe that the next partner on this list should be Parakarry, also in the Flawed. Now, Parakarry is going to be the last character in the Flawed, because I genuinely think that he doesn't do quite enough good as the other do to make it up to mediocre, but he has some things going for it. His attacks are alright, especially Air Raid. That's pretty useful. It can hit all enemies, but it's just kind of a worse version of Sushie's screen wipe attack. And his overworld ability, where he can carry Mario across gaps, is alright, if nothing particularly special. Now, the main issue why he doesn't rank into the mediocre is because other characters in this game have bad backstories, like Bombette, Sushie, Watt, Kooper, Goombario, and that's fine. Not every character is going to have a good backstory, and that's one of the things that the Thousand Year Door does better than Paper Mario 64, actually giving a good and detailed backstory to each of its partners. But the issue with Parakarry is that his backstory is actively a detriment to his character. The only reason he joined with Mario is to help gather his letters, but he doesn't even really do that throughout the journey. Yes, he can gather some of his letters with Mario, but given how important the postal service is in Paper Mario 64, given that email hasn't been invented yet, he's very bad at his job and an incredibly irresponsible postal worker, as he operates an essential service for all of the denizens of the Mushroom Kingdom to receive their courier, and he doesn't even do a good job about it. He just goes on an adventure with Mario for something that doesn't even really require his skills. He's overall just bad at his job and not a good character and just kind of a mediocre partner to use in battle. And it's because of this that he doesn't quite make it into mediocre. Okay, well, we're done with the partners that I consider bad. Now we're in the partners that I just think are okay. And who better to start in the okay tier as Admiral Bobbery? Now, I know this is a controversial opinion. I mean, perhaps his story is very good, but even with that, I have a few problems with it. First of all, Podley, he had the letter that Scarlet gave him to give to Bobbery after she died. That would clear up his guilt, essentially, his sense of uselessness after his wife died. But the issue here is that Podley just decided to keep it for no apparent reason, and to no end anyway. It's not like he had a motive, because as soon as Mario asks about it, he just gives it to Mario with barely any questions, and the story progresses. And given as though that's the only thing that was keeping Bobbery away from the seas, it just kind of feels like a contrivance. One of the two major plot holes in the Thousand Year Door, which is otherwise a pretty airtight story, if I must say. Apart from that, Bobbery's overworld ability is pretty situational. You unlock him pretty late in the game, and there just aren't that many cracked walls that need to be blown up. And in battle, he's a tank. He's one of the two tank characters in this game, along with Madame Flurrie. The difference is that Flurrie actually has a greater purpose as a tank, as Lip Lock can heal her, and then she can attack with Body Slam to do damage while healing herself, and still, completing the cycle just over and over and over again to just deal damage, heal, deal damage, heal, deal damage, heal. Bobbery can't really do that, and Flurrie is unlocked in Chapter 2. Bobbery's unlocked in Chapter 5, and so you don't really have that much of a use for him in battle. He does have a lot of HP, which I guess makes him good for some players, but again, I'm not even a Thousand Year Door tank player, and much less a Bobbery tank player in the Thousand Year Door, so I get very little use out of him. Not a bad partner in any capacity, just one who's not all that necessary. Now, next in the mediocre tier, we have Kooper. Now, Kooper is alright. He could have definitely been worse. His attacks are pretty good for the early game, and even at the end, he unlocks his Fire Shell ability. That's incredibly useful in Chapter 7, which makes him a favorite to use in that chapter. The issue with Kooper, though, is that I already complained about Goombario having a very basic personality that's not really elaborated on in any capacity. He's just a fan of Mario, and that's all there is to him. Though the devs decided that we wanted another character, a clone of Goombario, to not just exist in the same game as him, but to be unlocked literally, I'm pretty sure, less than half an hour after you unlock Goombario. It makes no sense. If they were going to make clones of the same character, why not spread them out in the game so it's less obvious? As it stands, Kooper is just a fan of Colorado. There's nothing else to him. He doesn't have an arc like Koops about learning to protect his family and all of that. He's just a fan of Colorado. It doesn't really lend itself to good story. His overworld mechanic is alright. There are plenty of switches that you need to hit. It is situational, but it's a lot more common than Bobbery. Now, the other thing that keeps him down is, again, his story doesn't really attach to anything. He barely has a story. He's a clone of Goombario, but given that he's alright in battle, I decided to keep him in mediocre. Now, moving on, we have the next entry in mediocre, and I really didn't want to put him this low, but reasonably I can't justify putting him any higher. Next is Huey. Now, Huey's an alright character and does introduce some good things to the game, but I have major issues with his backstory. He gets credit over some of the others because at least he has an attempt at a backstory, whereas with Kersti they don't even try. But the problem is that everything involving the paint stars, the Huey himself, the black paint, just anything involving paint in a game called Color Splash, all about paint, is never explained. You're just sort of left to guess what the black paint is, its origins, why was Huey created, all of that. And it's just these massive question marks all over his character that make Huey really hard to rank. Where he shines, though, is in his personality. He's very chill, he's very friendly, and he's much easier to get along with than, again, Kersti. The main issue, though, is that he largely doesn't innovate that much over Kersti. Sure, he introduces the cutout mechanic and just being able to use paint in the game, which, again, like, isn't terrible. It's just that I wish there was a bit more to him and that it was actually explained in detail. Now, moving on. Our next and, I believe, final entry in mediocre is going to be Goombario. Now, I put Goombario down here just because of his basic design, basic personality, and all that, but in battle, exclusively in battle, he's actually a pretty good partner. He has good attacks. Tattle is very useful. I know some players prefer to use the Peekaboo badge, but I love using Tattle. And using Charge, although it's not nearly as good as Rallywink, is pretty good once you unlock Multi-Bonk. Only once you unlock Multi-Bonk, though. It's not really useful before that. He's an alright partner in battle and can do some serious damage once he charges, against bosses in particular, but it's just his basicness, him just being defined as a fan of Mario and nothing else, that keeps him this low. Now, it is time to start the adequate tier. And our first adequate party member is going to be Professor Toad. Now, Professor Toad is fine. He's an alright character. He goes through an arc about learning to be brave. It's kind of like Koops, but slightly worse. He ultimately decides to confront his fears in the Temple of the Shrooms, but he's not. But because the partners in this game aren't part of the actual boss fights, he doesn't have as satisfying as a conclusion to his arc as, say, again, Koops does. But he's not a bad partner. His ability is alright. It's a far greater improvement on Bobby, even if it's not as good as the later partners in this game. And he's the only one to have an overworld ability, which is actually required to dig up the gemstones in the desert. The shoveling is alright and controls pretty well, but I'm just so confused as to why this is the only partner that has any ability in this game. Like, it would make more sense. There aren't even that many partners in the game. It wouldn't have been that hard to give them all unique abilities. Just the fact that there's only one is kind of weird. Also, there's the fact that in Origami King, you can't control any of the partners, similar to the previous two games, which, again, is kind of annoying, because it wouldn't even really be that hard. All they would have to do is give you less actions when you have a party member. Then, after Mario completes his turn, the companions have 2 attacks, one to attack a line, one to attack a square, and then you can hit action commands. It wouldn't even really be that hard to implement. All they would have to do is lower the amount of actions that you're allowed when you have another member in your party. Now, aside from this, there's not really else to him. He has a far more unique character design than Huey and Kersti does, but again, it's sort of just a basic archaeology uniform. It's not as impressive as Goombella, so there's really not much more I could say. A fine character, but, you know, could be better. Next in the adequate tier, we have Sushie. Now, Sushie is this high just because of her gameplay. Now, I would have put her much lower as she barely has a personality, barely has a story, is almost as irresponsible as Parakarry, but given as though she has the theoretical highest damage cap in the entire game, I had to give her something, even though everything else is pretty bad. I find myself using her much more than I do some of the partners lower in the list, which is why I feel like she had to go inadequate at the very least. Nothing more to say, really. Also, her water attacks are incredibly useful for Chapter 5, where she's introduced. So at the very least, she's thematically appropriate. She's thematically and mechanically appropriate for the chapter she's introduced in, unlike Lakilester, for example. Moving on with adequate partners, we have Flurrie. Now, the main issue with Flurrie is that I don't find myself using her all that much. Her gameplay is, in the overworld, is very situational. There just aren't as many, invisible blocks that you need to uncover compared to, say, switches that you need to hit with Koops, for example. So she just really does not have that much use in this game. And in battle, she can be really useful. I recognize, unlike Bobbery and Miss Mouse, that she can actually have a very good use in gameplay if you use Lip Lock and then Body Slam in quick succession. Gale Force is also much better than Lakilester's equivalent move because you actually get EXP for it. Though I prefer not to battle when there's chance at mind. I only use it as a last resort when I'm playing as Flurrie. So overall, she has a really effective strategy that you can use, but it's not really one I'm interested. I don't really like using partners in these games as support or tanks. I like just getting in as much damage as fast as possible, as I feel like that's the most satisfying way to play. Now, next on this list is going to be Vivian. Now, Vivian is this low because of her overworld ability, and to a slightly lesser extent, her in-battle gameplay. Her story is very good. I think that it was probably the best written story in the game because it has no flaws, unlike Bobbery's story, which has a pretty big plot hole. The only issue is how quickly they try to wrap it up in the post-credit scene, but given as though that's a post-credit scene, I'm willing to exclude that from my judgment. Now, her overworld ability is probably one of the worst in the game. It doesn't control very well, as all you can do is hide underground during very specific portions of the game, and it probably has the least use in the entire game. Now, the reason why, and it's kind of annoying, too, because I feel like if they slightly redesigned it, it could have been very useful. Imagine if Vivian could pull Mario into the shadows, and then she could move with him underground, with the advantage being that you don't have to touch any enemies, but the disadvantage being that you move far slower than you do in the overworld. That could actually have uses all throughout the game in a similar way to the Yoshi Kid. However, as it stands, it's probably the second least useful overworld ability in this entire game. Now, apart from that, her actual in-battle gameplay is pretty good. She can set all enemies on fire if they can be set on fire, which does have a lot of uses. The burn effect can deal damage over time, which is why I think that she's slightly more useful than Flurrie, because you can set enemies on fire, then switch her out for someone else who can do more damage, and just have enemies perpetually burn, which, again, has a lot of its uses. Also, the fact that she's completely essential to Chapter 4, both story and gameplay-wise, whereas Flurrie is not really that essential in her chapter, makes it so that I think that Vivian is a better partner overall. Now, to conclude the adequate tier, we have Bowser himself. Now, I would have put Bowser higher, but just the fact that you use him for such a short amount of time, I think the Origami Castle might be the shortest final dungeon in any Mario RPG. It goes by so quickly. Now, apart from that issue, is that most of his story happens outside of when you unlock him. Having a partner that you can that's actually an essential component of the final boss is very interesting, even if he gets knocked out at the end of the second phase. The sumo fight, though, in Phase 2 is very cool, and just the fact that for the first time in this entire series, he joins Mario out of obligation instead of just Peach forcing his hand into joining him in Super Paper Mario, or just being a paperweight, for lack of a better expression, in the Thousand Year Door. Here he actually has a role, and a pretty good one. And just the sheer terror of the Origami invasion forces him to join Mario's side without question. He gets to watch all of his minions be tortured, mutilated, and brainwashed into serving Ollie. And it's pretty terrifying. He spends most of the game as a wet floor sign, and only after beating the stapler does he manage to return to normal. Now, he does give a pretty good pep talk to Olivia in the titular bridge scene in between the penultimate and final boss, but this is about as far as his character goes. He doesn't really have an involved arc in his chapter. Also, as cool as he is, he's not as interesting as some of the original characters who have their own arcs. Moving on to the appreciated, we have Watt. Now, Watt is very bad in terms of story. Not really anything else. She's a baby spark plug, I think, and she has no reason to be in this game at all. She has no connection to her chapter, which is kind of strange. But aside from that, she has a unique character design, which is pretty cool. She has a bunch of really effective defense-piercing attacks, especially the flashlight one, which can be very useful, especially against this game's against this chapter's boss. And she does carry her use throughout the entire game for enemies and bosses with really high defense, given as though she can hit them in the air. But apart from that, there's really nothing else to this character. Like I said, the only reason she's this high is because of design and gameplay, not anything else. Now, moving on. There's only a few partners left to cover. And I think that the next one on this list is, sadly, Koops. Now, Koops is alright. He has a fine character, a fine arc, and unlike Kooper, he does get some pretty significant improvements. He's not just a clone of another character. He does go through an original story where he has to learn to protect his family, save his dad from Hooktail, and confront his greatest fears. His overworld ability is the exact same as Kooper, so he can hit switches, and there's a decent amount of them in this game, so he remains pretty useful. He also doesn't become obsolete as the game goes on, because he gets a defense-piercing shell attack, as well as being able to defend Mario, which does have its uses. Apart from that, there's nothing really to say to Koops. He's just better than Kooper in every way, and one of the reasons why he makes it up to this tier. Now, also, as much as it pains me, the next one on this list is Tippi, or Lady Timpani. Now, she's a good character and all, but her gameplay is what really brings her down, and design as well. Like I said, I do not like Super Paper Mario's art style at all. I think it looks way too much like Microsoft Paint and not nearly enough like paper. People always say, oh, well, the original point of Paper Mario was never about paper. It was always about the art style. It was about looking like a pop-up book. It was never exclusively just about looking like everything was like a paper diorama. Now, I disagree with this because I think it's two different interpretations of the same thing. in the first two games, the sets were designed to resemble a pop-up book, and the reason why this franchise starts with an opening of a storybook is because it's supposed to emulate that. Now, in the latter three games, and Color Splash and Origami King in particular, this was dropped in favor of looking like a paper diorama, but the storytelling aspect still remains. It is still meant to be a paper world in which a story is told in. And on this subject, Super Paper Mario really adds nothing in this aspect. Everything looks pixelated and like it was, again, drawn on a computer. It's just not all that interesting. Now, back to Tippi's character, though. She does have a pretty good backstory with Count Bleck, and I have my problems with Super Paper Mario's story as a whole. I think that the entire resummoning of the Pure Hearts, just defining what the Pure Hearts even are, in the Origami King, Paper Mario 64, and the Thousand Year Door, the MacGuffins are all clearly explained and established. The streamers are what keeps the door to the Peach's Castle sealed shut. You cannot enter Peach's Castle unless all the streamers are destroyed at their source. You cannot defeat Bowser unless you get all the star spirits together in order to perform a special beam attack to break Bowser's invincibility, and you cannot open the Thousand Year Door without the crystal stars. But the pieces, the royal stickers, the paint stars, and the pure hearts are all really poorly explained. Whether they're real objects or they can just be summoned just when a good deed is done is entirely glossed over in the game. It just seems like they can appear whenever it's convenient to the writers. But apart from that, Tippi has a good backstory with Count Bleck. She does have some good character moments at the end where she confronts Blumiere and asks him to stop his plan. It doesn't really amount to anything though, so it's kind of useless in that regard. Also, she suffers from an important trap when writing characters where her backstory is the only part of her character that matters. She has amnesia for the entire game, which is really just an excuse for the entire story to not be revealed. But that kind of falls flat because for most of the game, she doesn't really have any attachment to the story and is just kind of along for the ride. I do give credit to her personality, though. Having a stoic, methodical, determined character is far better than trying to clone Goombella again and just making something worse in the process. So, next up, our final entry in the Appreciated is Lady Bow. Now, I've seen her called Lady Bow and Lady Bow, but my theory is Lady Bow since she has bows, and most of these names are puns anyway. So, Lady Bow is good in battle. The Fan Smack is an incredibly powerful ability, and even her regular slap is very effective in Chapter 3 when she's introduced. She can't do as much damage as Mario, which is the problem that all of the Paper Mario 64 campaign partners suffer from, in that they're all less effective than Mario. There's not as many strategies as there are in the Thousand Year Door, which really drags her effectiveness down. However, I will give credit where credit is due. She does have a unique design. She actually does have a story. Chapter 3 is probably the most unique in the entire game, as she is sort of a morally gray character. She kidnaps one of the star spirits who escaped from Tubba Blubba and holds him prisoner until Mario saves her fellow Boos from Tubba Blubba. Now, I think this is interesting because it offers a more unique character than anything else in the game, but it also creates an interesting dichotomy between the morality of both Bow and Tubba Blubba. Yes, Tubba Blubba kidnapped all the Boos, but he only did that because they kept scaring him. And Lady Bow only kidnap the Star Spirit because all of the boos are kidnapped. So it really is a good example, if unintentional by the developers, of how cycles of violence can perpetuate and ultimately solve no one's problem in the end. Aside from that, though, her story is pretty bare bones and not really all that well established. It's for that reason that I have to keep her in, that I can't put her in the excellent, unlike the 5 remaining partners that we have. So, Yoshi Kid, or whatever you want to name him, since you can name him anything in the game, is going to be the first of the final 5 characters on this list. Now, he's here for one reason alone. He doesn't really have anything to do with the story, and he's the last character on this list that has absolutely no involvement in the story. He's only here because his attacks are just that good. Gulp, Ground Pound, Mini Egg, and Stampede are so effective. Especially if you have debuffs on an enemy, you can completely trample them with Stampede. Now, aside from that, there's not really anything else to this guy. He has a okay design, and he's one of the only partners in this game besides Vivian who is entirely required, because his second attack, Gulp, is required to beat the Iron Adonis twins in the Glitz Pit, which makes him an essential piece to complete the game. However, he doesn't really have any relevance beyond that. His overworld ability, though, is very effective. Just being able to dash in this game cuts down on a lot of backtracking, even if most of it was addressed in the remake anyway. And the hover ability does have its use more than probably any other partner does in this game. Despite this, though, he is not the best partner for reasons we're going to see later. Now, next up is Kamek. Now, Kamek goes in the excellent tier because at first you might think, well, why is he this high up? It's just Kamek. Well, it's because he does have the same attack as Bowser, just doing slightly less damage, so there's nothing really to talk about there. However, his story role is actually important, and is probably the biggest story role that Kamek has ever been given in a Mario game, where he's upset that nobody ever takes him seriously, nobody ever accepts his ideas, and he always tries to do the same thing, but it fails because of incompetence, like the button labeling of the exhaust versus the secret weapon in Bowser's Castle, which is one of the few subtle jokes in this game that I think works, because it's not in your face, it's left for you to discover, and just the fact that he's right every single fork in the road, and then he reveals that that he didn't even have a strategy to picking the right way on the way to the 4th spring. He just knew which way to go because he picked the opposite answer of what he called the emotional arguments, which I just think is hilarious. He also is willing to put himself in harm's way to save both Bowser and Bowser Jr., even if he is somewhat of a coward, which I think is some very good character building moment. He does genuinely respect both of them, even if he is disappointed that they don't seem to appreciate his valor as much as he thinks they should. Apart from that, a great character, but still doesn't have that much going for him. He does have a lot going for him, but he doesn't have that much going for him in terms of gameplay compared to the others. Now, next up, we have 3 characters left, and I'm pretty sure you know who number 3 is. Next is Goombella. Now, Goombella has, like I said, a very good character design. They really managed to make a archaeological uniform work on a Goomba, which is something that I didn't think could be done. I just didn't think it could work that well, but they still did it, which I think is very impressive. Now, aside from that, her Rally Wink is one of the most powerful attacks in this game, since it gives Mario his second turn, meaning that you can use a special attack and then heal, for example, or attack and then use a special attack, or anything. There are so many possibilities with Rally Wink, I couldn't possibly name them all, but just know that it's incredibly effective attack. Multi-bonk is just as good as ever, although I did notice that it's a lot harder to hit in the remake. I might just have gotten bad on it, but I think that multi-bonk did get, the timing did get a little bit harder. I checked with the Battletoad, and it's because they changed the timing a little bit. Before, you had to hit the A button just before she landed on the enemy, but there was a pretty wide range to do that. But in the remake, you need to hit A as soon as she pivots 180 degrees, as soon as she turns her head down at her highest point in the air. That's when you hit A. It's not really all that intuitive since it's not the same in any other game, but I just thought I'd point that out. Aside from that, she does have story relevance as she's in Rogueport researching the crystal stars and was almost kidnapped by Lord Crump and his henchmen to be interrogated for answers about that. Granted, it's not a big story role, but just her gameplay and tattle function. Oh, that's right. I forgot to talk about her tattle function. Now, tattling is very useful in this game since you can learn more about all of the enemies' HP, attack, defense, and all of that, but I would argue that it's more streamlined in this game, and given that Goombella is actually a useful character to have out because of Rally Wink, I think that she's far more useful than Goombario. And she actually has a creative design and character. Now, apart from that, she also has a new hint system that you can access with ZL in the remake, which I also think is a great addition. Again, it's not necessary. You don't need it to beat the game, but it's overall a pretty great inclusion. I think that it, especially because some of the puzzles in this game are a tiny bit obtuse. It is helpful if you're stuck and you don't know what the next objective is. Aside from that, there is nothing really else to Goombella. But of course, we have 2 characters left. Just 2. And originally, when making this list, I wanted to put only one character in the gold standard, to establish one character as the singular gold standard for every character in the series. And for a while, that gold standard was Goombella. She was such an important fundamental piece of the Thousand Year Door that many future games copied her exact design template in hopes that they would make just as popular of a character. But in light of this, Olivia and Bobby are just too good. I could not justify putting them any lower than the gold standard, though Olivia is slightly higher in my opinion for reasons that I will get into. But for now, let's talk about both of them simultaneously. Bobby. Now, what is there even to say about Bobby? He's one of the most brave story choices I think I've seen in a video game. Just the idea that artificial bob-ombs are essentially little more than pieces of scrap metal that get designed, manufactured, and then marched to their death just to fulfill their one purpose. Now, Bobby, like some other characters on this list, has amnesia, but unlike Tippi, it doesn't feel like an excuse not to give him a character, just an excuse for him to rediscover his character. And when he rediscovers it, he remembers what his job is. His job is to help people. He was designed for one purpose: blowing up and killing himself. And by any means necessary, that he must make an impact. His final explosion must mean something. Now, there are several in the Paper Mario community who have pointed out a contradiction of sorts. Bobby only blows himself up, and then never comes back. Whereas, contrarily, Bombette and Bobbery could blow themselves up as many times as they want, and they're fine. Well, it's never established for sure in the game, but it does leave room for interpretation, and this is mine. Bombette and Bobbery are clearly unique bob-ombs. They're bob-ombs that were born naturally. However, Bob-ombs are born. And that's why they have different designs, is because they were born naturally. Also, they only manage to blow up small pieces of already damaged infrastructure. When you have them and you blow up, you can only damage already damaged walls. And all of the Bob-ombs, the completely identical Bob-ombs that work for Bowser, all of them, when they die, they just disappear. They don't come back when you beat them. How come? Well, it's because of what I'm going to get to in Bobby. Assembly line Bob-ombs that are produced mostly for Bowser's army are single-use and disposable, with the cost of being able to blow up far greater structures than natural Bob-ombs, which is why they're so valuable. Bobby, in one blast, completely detonates an entire boulder with no damage, whereas, like I said, these two only manage to damage already broken pieces of wall. Now, aside from this, Bobby has one flaw, in that he's the most useless partner in battle. He can only attack one enemy at a time, and he misses it, which is kind of disappointing. I do wish he was a bit more useful. But aside from this, you can't even really complain that his character design is bad, because his character design being bland is part of his character. He's an assembly line Bob-omb. He's not meant to look unique. He's one of the thousands that are sent to his death to fulfill one purpose, and do so without a single thanks. And it's because of this that I think he's one of the most interesting characters. Just the idea that Bob-ombs are manufactured Bob-ombs are just meant to die, and that's their only purpose. And it's because of the attachment he has to he kills himself not in spite of his attachment to his friends, but because of it. It's because he cares so much about Olivia that he volunteers to sacrifice himself, because he knows that he has a job to do, and he must fulfill his job by any means necessary. In the Chapter 5, when you yourself send hundreds of Bob-ombs to your death, all that does is further establish this point. You shoot Bob-ombs by the hundreds out of Bowser's cannon on a ship, and it doesn't matter to you because you don't know any of them. They're all just fulfilling their purpose. They might have attachment to someone, they might have had an attachment to each other, but it doesn't matter to you because you never knew them. It's the same thing with Bobby. It's the idea that all of these are just nameless, faceless soldiers that are sent to their death by the hundreds, by the thousands, by the millions even, and with no other purpose than to explode and be replaced by the next one in line, which is ultimately what I think is the bravest, not the best, as we're going to see with Olivia, but the bravest story in this entire franchise. Now, moving on to Olivia. Olivia is the definitive gold standard for, I think, what every partner should be. She could be a little bit more involved with the gameplay, but she still does plenty. You can use the thousand-fold arms, the Vellumentals. I do wish there was a little bit more, hands-on, that you could do a little bit more with these in the overworld, but it's still pretty effective. And in battle, you can use these same moves to defeat bosses or even regular enemies, which I think is a great addition that Kersti and Huey simply lacked. But there's one other thing that makes Olivia really good, is that her character, Bobby's entire character arc, is just another part of her character arc. She, of course, was folded to life by her brother, who is... And the interesting thing between the two of them is their dichotomy. Olivia represents everything pure, noble, and good, whereas Ollie represents the everything evil and malicious and I would say spiteful. And it's how these two characters link to each other that I think is very unique for the series, as nowhere before, aside from, I guess, Tippi, but even then, it didn't really come into play because she didn't have a character, really, for most of the story. These two are constantly at odds throughout the game, and it's their different perceptions of what a world in which origami and paper can coexist that is the fundamental crux for the entire narrative of the story. It shows how you can choose to be perpetually angry and spiteful about everyone for the slightest inconvenience, but that's not the path to true happiness. And it's Olivia's warm embrace of everyone and everything that is in complete contrast to Ollie's vicious hatred. Now, the other thing that's interesting about Olivia is just how they managed to make a character that is so naive that has to be explained everything and is just seeing the world for the first time, but never to an annoying degree. It's always endearing. And the fact that they made that character be the hint system too, a character that is supposed to know everything, yet still knows nothing, and the fact that they managed to give her a unique but still detailed character design in Origami and managed to make her look like the villain in, again, very interesting dichotomy, makes her, in my opinion, the very best of all of the Paper Mario partners in this franchise. Now, that's about it. I want to thank everybody who stayed to the end for watching. I really appreciate it, and if you don't mind, if you could like and subscribe, that would be very much appreciated. Well, thank you to all of you, and see you next time.